Psychology shows that cutting off old friends is rarely impulsive, cold, or heartless. Most people do not wake up one day and suddenly erase years of shared history. Instead, it happens after a long period of quiet emotional calculation and internal weighing. The mind slowly notices that something feels misaligned, even when nothing looks obviously wrong. Conversations feel familiar, yet strangely disconnected from who you are becoming. The relationship still exists, but it no longer fits the shape of your inner life. Psychology explains that humans seek coherence between identity and environment to feel emotionally safe. When that coherence breaks, discomfort appears long before conscious decisions are made. Cutting off old friends is often the final step, not the first reaction. It is rarely about anger, betrayal, or dramatic conflict. More often, it is about realizing the relationship belongs to a version of yourself that has quietly expired. This process looks calm on the outside, but internally, it can take years to complete. And by the time distance happens, the emotional decision has already been made. One identity outgrows the social circle. Psychology shows that identity does not evolve at the same speed as social relationships. As people grow, their values, boundaries, and self-image quietly shift over time. What once felt natural can begin to feel slightly out of place without obvious conflict. Old friendships often reflect earlier versions of the self that no longer exist. Versions built around survival, uncertainty, or emotional limitation. Staying connected can feel like being gently pulled backward into a role you outgrew. Not because your friends are bad people, but because they remember who you used to be. Psychology explains that the mind seeks alignment to maintain internal stability. When relationships mirror an outdated identity, tension slowly builds beneath the surface. You may feel unseen, misunderstood, or subtly restricted without knowing why. Cutting off contact becomes a way to protect identity coherence, not erase shared history. It is not a rejection of the past, but an acknowledgement of personal evolution. Distance forms when growth moves faster than the relationships around it. And sometimes letting go is the only way to move forward without fragmentation. 2. Emotional labor quietly becomes imbalanced. Psychology shows that most relationships do not end because of one dramatic conflict. They end because emotional effort becomes uneven over time. One person consistently listens, supports, explains, or adapts. The other remains largely unchanged, unaware, or emotionally unavailable. At first, the imbalance feels manageable and easy to justify. You tell yourself this is what loyalty or patience looks like. But psychology shows that emotional labor accumulates silently in the nervous system. Each unreciprocated effort adds weight, even when there is no resentment. Eventually, the brain stops registering the relationship as connection. It begins to register it as ongoing effort and emotional cost. Spending time together feels draining rather than nourishing. Distance then creates an unexpected sense of relief. Not relief from the person, but relief from the constant emotional work. Cutting off contact becomes less about conflict and more about self-preservation. And the absence of that relationship feels lighter than its presence ever did. 3. Silence appears before the cutoff. One of the clearest psychological signs before a cutoff is silence. Not the loud kind, but the quiet disappearance of explanation. People slowly stop defending their choices or correcting misunderstandings. They stop asking to be seen, understood, or emotionally met. Psychology explains this as emotional withdrawal, not indifference. When someone feels repeatedly misunderstood, the mind begins conserving energy. Explaining yourself starts to feel pointless and emotionally expensive. Each attempt to clarify only deepens the sense of being unseen. So the mind disengages long before the relationship officially ends. Conversation continues on the surface, but emotional presence fades underneath. By the time distance happens, communication has already failed internally. Cutting off friends often occurs after silence has done its work. It is not a sudden decision, but the final expression of long-term disengagement. What looks like coldness from the outside is often emotional exhaustion inside. And silence becomes the bridge between connection and departure. 4. Outgrowing the role they were given. Psychology shows that many friendships lock people into fixed emotional roles. The funny one, the quiet one, the reckless one, the weak one. These roles form unconsciously and remain stable for years. They help groups function, but they also limit personal growth. As someone evolves, they may begin stepping outside that assigned identity. This shift often creates subtle resistance from the people around them, not intentional, but rooted in familiarity and comfort. A psychology explains that change threatens group stability more than conflict does. When others expect you to remain the same, growth can feel suffocating. You may sense disappointment, confusion, or quiet pushback when you change. The cutoff is rarely about disliking friends or rejecting shared memories. It is about refusing to stay confined to an outdated version of yourself. Remaining in that role begins to feel emotionally constricting. Distance becomes the only way to breathe without explanation, and letting go becomes an act of psychological self-respect. 5. Accepting that closure isn't always a conversation. One of the hardest psychological shifts is realizing that closure is not always mutual. Not every ending can be explained into understanding. Some people will never see you clearly, no matter how carefully you speak. A psychology shows that repeated explanation without insight leads to emotional fatigue. Eventually, the mind stops seeking validation through conversation. Silence becomes a boundary rather than an avoidance. Emotionally mature individuals recognize when dialogue no longer creates clarity. They accept that understanding is not something they can force. Distance then becomes the most honest form of closure available, not because they lack empathy, but because they value internal stability. Letting go without explanation is not cruelty. It is an acknowledgement of emotional limits. Sometimes the healthiest response is to step back without asking to be understood. And the absence of words protects more than continued conversation ever could. Cutting off old friends does not mean someone is cold or ungrateful. Psychology shows it often means they chose coherence over emotional chaos. Not all connections are meant to last forever. Some are meant to shape you, then quietly release you. The healthiest minds learn when holding on costs more than letting go. And walking away becomes an act of alignment, not abandonment. Have you ever ended a friendship because you outgrew it?